Hey everyone, welcome in to another daily editorial here on the KE Report. Corey and Chad here chatting with Matt Battiali. He is the editor of the New Energy newsletter published under Mangrove Investor. Now I will post a link to the Mangrove Investor website. And as we have been more regularly chatting with Matt, it is focused on the critical minerals sector. And it's actually timely to be chatting today because we had news out of Tesla that they have broke ground on their new lithium refinery. This plan for this lithium refinery is to support production of 1 million electric vehicles by 2025. And it just further validates all these people saying, look, the US, well, a lot of countries are focused on domestic production when it comes to these critical minerals. And quite frankly, we're still talking resources, but we're also tying Tesla in here with an investment for a processing plant. I find it interesting that Elon Musk has said, or well, it doesn't sound like they know exactly where they're going to get their ore from. But quite frankly, look, there are some opportunities out there. So it opens up kind of that blue sky potential, I think, for investors in this critical mineral space. Matt, let's start off with this news out of Tesla. How significant is this to you?
I think it's very significant. I see this as the kind of the first drips of a flood that's coming. I mean, when we think about electric vehicles and renewable energy, you immediately think about lithium batteries. The legislation that was passed in the states last year, I think it was the Inflation Reduction Act, basically said we're going to give you a tax break if you buy an electric vehicle and if you build solar plants and windmills and that sort of thing. The only way you can get the whole tax break, which is for the cars, I think it's $7,500, is if the metals in the cars and in the batteries in particular are sourced from North American suppliers. And so the problem is that most of these materials that we need to build these batteries and solar farms and windmills, they're refined in China. So to see a new lithium refinery in the States is huge. It's a huge deal because it's an investment in North American production, but it's also an investment that defies all the concentration into China, which is where it was. The industry in the past really was focused on putting all this infrastructure in China. And so what we end up with is if you want to build a lithium ion battery in Europe, for example, 97% of the lithium has to come from China to build that battery plant. This is a big deal.
Well, Matt, to that point, we've seen Tesla look at other parts of the battery. Nickel is also an important part of the battery, not just lithium. And they made a deal with Talon Metals last year, I think beginning of 2022 in Minnesota, to be able to source it for exactly those reasons, to make sure it was domestically sourced nickel. Do you think we'll see Tesla go out, do some partnerships with lithium companies and say, hey, I'd like to do an offtake contract with your deposit, that kind of thing, and fast track it into production?
I do, and I think, like I said, I think this is just the first trickle of what's going to be a flood. I think that the lithium is the first step, and it's not just Tesla. I mean, we saw Albemarle has committed $1.3 billion to building a new refinery in South Carolina that will they'll break ground next year on that. So it stands to reason that you're going to see offtake agreements for lithium to supply these production facilities, but I suspect you're going to see more and more of these agreements between the end users or the battery manufacturers, and if the vehicle makers are making their own batteries, and producers, because you're thinking about the economics of these deals with shipping costs as high as they are, because remember during COVID, shipping costs skyrocketed. The cost of moving a container by ship tripled. Went from $4,000 to $12,000 a container. And so to be able to source these materials in the States, you now have a margin that you didn't have before because shipping costs are so high. And so I'm waiting to see, there's a solar panel manufacturer they're building their plant in Winnipeg right now, and they're sourcing their sand from a local deposit. They actually developed this deposit for frac sand, and it turned out it was so pure that they didn't need to do much to it at all to be able to produce really high quality solar panels. There aren't places that manufacture solar panels in North America right now. And so their margin, the way they can compete with Asian solar panel glass is the cost to ship that stuff is so high that's their margin. That makes them very economically viable.
Matt, so we are seeing some of the bigger companies, right, start to take maybe some of these offtake agreements and everything. But do you think it filters down to the juniors, to the explorers?
The old trickle-down economic theory. Well, let's say I hope so, but I haven't seen anything like that yet. But here's the thing that I think is a positive overall for North American exploration in general, which is we're seeing liquidity coming into the space that we didn't have before, right? I can't think of a time, and maybe someone out there in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong, but when did a car manufacturer ever build a metal refinery? And when did they ever build one in the States or in North America? So there is money coming into the sector from a new space. And I think that legislation gives it a tailwind in North America, but I think there's a tailwind for this from all over the world. They're demanding new batteries. They're demanding more research. So you're seeing parts of the battery change. The materials that are being used in it are changing. So we're seeing actually a move from graphite to silicon in the anode and cathode. So we're pivoting even as we go. So investments have to be made because no one is going to build a business around one of these tiny little niche elements without being supported by deep pockets. No, it's a difficult value proposition to go out and raise money on your own to go explore for scandium, right? So we need to see more of this liquidity filter through and make it down to exploration, or else we're going to run out of projects that can produce.
Well, Matt, to this point, I mean, it sounds like what we're talking about is really an integrated supply chain, or what they call a vertical supply chain, where a company controls the sourcing of the product, manufacturing, and the distribution. So when you think about what Tesla's doing, they're sourcing nickel from Minnesota. They may end up sourcing lithium from somebody domestically. They've got the refinery in the U.S., then they've got their battery plant, their giga plant in Texas. So it makes sense that they're going to refine it next to where they're going to build the batteries. And then they've got the car. So that's really the whole integrated supply chain. But there also are governments that are trying to spur this along. And when you look at the United States and Canada, they are giving out money. So in addition to companies and manufacturers, the government finally has had a light bulb come on. And to your point, I don't remember the government ever giving out money and funds to be able to help the mining industry. So what do you think that says just as a statement? And do you think more countries are going to follow suit?
It's a mixed bag right now. It is very interesting to me that, we have, on the one hand, we have subsidies, and on the other hand, you have lots of rumbles of nationalization, which is never a good plan, or windfall taxes, which is also never a good plan. So, the model that I like to look at for incentivizing investments, because that's what really needs to come down to. There needs to be an incentive for investment and for people to go out and look for new scandium deposits, right? So the oil and gas industry set up just a fantastic tax credit system that spurred investment here in the States. I think that was, the really one of the reasons why the oil industry in the States has been so vibrant, that has been so innovative, is because we have investment. And I also believe that one of the reasons why exploration has really not come up their mineral exploration hasn't had a massive step change in technology in a long time. And I think it's because there really is a lack of capital in that direction. And it's difficult to raise money for really smart people to go out and kick rocks, let alone invest in new technologies that will increase our exploration success. I mean, I think of Ivanhoe Electric as kind of being one of the first exploration companies that I've seen, and their Typhoon system isn't really anything groundbreaking. It's still it's a pretty well-known geophysical tool. It's just amped up, higher power, and using a much better software package. So, that's where the money has to go, and I think that means that governments have to be involved. Now, whether or not the conviction, what I see in the States is that you don't have as much conviction across all parties. Right now, we have one party that's very much, they think this is a boondoggle, and the other party thinks it's very necessary. And so it's difficult to see them putting a lot of money in, long term, when in 4 years or in 2 years, the next iteration of the government comes along and they pull the plug on everything. That's difficult.
That's interesting. So that could maybe be a headwind, right? If we get a change in government, that they're just not as supportive for this sector. That being said, there's a lot of governments that are supportive too. When you're looking at lithium companies, I know we've talked about different jurisdictions as well, but with this news out of the U.S. and these new refineries being built, does this draw you a bit more into the U.S. market?
I think it draws me to the North American market for sure. Yes, when you have a refinery that is going to need material, I'll be very interested to see what kinds of lithium they'll be able to take. Are they going to take brines to refine? Are they going to take hard rock material? What are the parameters? But yeah, with Albemarle as well as Tesla building these refineries, absolutely. It all comes down to economics to me, right? And so if you have the right rocks and you can send it to a close by refiner, the economics look really good. And I guess the process costs, I'll be interested in following along with that. I'm sure that it will be less expensive to refine things in China on just a pure refining cost basis. The question is, can Tesla make lithium in Texas and make it economically enough that they can offset the higher costs of doing business in the States? And I'm sure they can. I'm sure they have all that material. They've already done that work, but I'll be really interested to follow along just on the the dollars and cents side of this. But yes, that was a long way around to say I'm very interested in North American lithium miners now.
Well, and if they don't have to ship things across the ocean back and forth, they're probably cutting out a lot of cost too, Matt, where even if they're more expensive to refine it here, to your point, cutting out the huge, not just monetary expense, but also time windows that it takes to get things back and forth to China and back may be a boon. But when you think about North American lithium, there's really not a ton of it because most of it's in South America in the Lithium Triangle. There is the Nevada Clayton Valley area, which is an area play, and there is now the James Bay area of Quebec that's got a lot of pegmatites with spodumene, which is the hard rock side of things. Do you think that those area plays will become even more investor focused now that we're seeing these two refineries going up in the U.S.?
I do. I think you're going to see more of these and different kinds of lithium projects. There's been some talk about the brines, from like oil field brines have lithium. Can we refine lithium out of that? There's been some discussion of like the hydrothermal brines. Can we refine lithium from that? There are lots of, I don't know the geology of the internally drained basins of the U.S. well, but that's what you're looking for. Like I think I mentioned on the last call we did that, like the Great Salt Lake probably has lithium in it. There's probably a layer of lithium brine. So I think that there are more locations that you could mine this, but having an off-taker in the States does change the economics of your projects. And when you can lower the bar and make these projects profitable, because as you said, you don't have to ship raw material to China and pay the processing costs, that's going to open the door to lots of new projects. And I'm sure that it will also broaden those area plays, right? Because if you're lowering the economic bar, it actually may just make more of the existing deposits economic. So that's really an important aspect of this.
Yeah, Matt, this is still just such a changing and adapting market too. And there needs to be this technology implemented in here to figure out how best to extract these certain minerals, right? And then to run them through these factories. But to have these factories and processing plants being built by these well-known companies that have money to build them, it is encouraging for this sector. And you know what? It does continue to draw in some more attention. And that does just naturally filter down to the explorers. But it's still not that these are new metals, but it's brought in some new investors. So it is a changing and adapting market. I'm still very interested in how this is all going to progress. But your point on governments, and if we had a change in government, how that could be a immediate headwind, that is also something for us to, I guess, be aware of as this critical minerals narrative does just keep growing. Matt, it's good chatting with you. Thank you again for breaking down some of these newer stories in the critical minerals space. We'll chat with you again in a couple weeks. Again, thanks for your time today, Matt. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.